Hey, what's up guys, it's Film Geek here, and it's time for this week's stack. This week we've got 7 movies, so let's get started. First up, I watched The Neverending Story. This movie is a huge classic from my childhood. Excuse me. And I haven't seen it since I was a kid. So I thought I'd go back and take a look, and man, did it still deliver or what? Yes, the lead kid who played Bastion kind of sucked at acting, but the rest of the acting was very cool, and it was a very cool and original story with lots of great characters and effects. It didn't have as good of puppetry as Jim Henson movies such as Labyrinth. In fact, I thought Falkor, who I thought was amazing when I was a kid, wasn't all that great. The fact that his mouth was totally nowhere near in sync with the voice kind of killed the character Falkor for me. But it was still a very cool movie overall, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. Next up, I watched the sequel, Neverending Story 2: The Next Chapter. This movie was nowhere near as good as the original. They had a completely different cast. In fact, the only cast member that was the same was the owner of the bookstore at the beginning of the movie. That doesn't really matter. And these new actors, the new Bastion was much better than the original Bastion, but all the other actors fell short, especially the childlike Empress. The girl who played the childlike Empress in the original Neverending Story was fantastic. This one, not so much. I give The Neverending Story 2: The Next Chapter a 3 out of 5, and it's only getting that high of a score because of the nostalgia. It should only get 2.5, but I'm being generous, giving it a 3. Next up is a movie that does not even need my generosity, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. This movie was out of this world fantastic. The acting was amazing. It had huge comedy, huge drama, huge intense action scenes, very cool special effects and direction and cinematography, amazing story. It was just a sweet movie all around. I give it a 5 out of 5, and you should definitely expect that Scott Pilgrim vs. the World to show up in my top 10 movies of 2010 list next week. Not going to tell you where it's going to be, but it's probably going to be on that list. Then I saw The Goods, Live Hard, Die Hard, and man, was this movie funny. It definitely is. I would say this movie is on par comedically with like Hot Tub Time Machine. It's not as good as The Hangover. It might not even be as good as Due Date, but it definitely hangs with Hot Tub Time Machine. I think it's a movie that was very overlooked, and I don't really know anyone other than me who has seen this movie, and that's a shame because the movie had me laughing out loud a lot. I give The Goods, Live Hard, Sell Hard a 3.5 out of 5. Then I saw a comedy that didn't make me laugh at all, 18-Year-Old Virgin. This was a independent comedy, low-budget movie, and it looked it, and it sounded it, and it was low budget. The acting was fairly horrendous, with exception of the actress who played the lead actress's best friend. She was actually surprisingly good for this low caliber of a movie, and I really hope she gets into bigger roles in bigger movies because she was very, very good and extremely good looking. The rest of the actors, however, were terrible. The acting was just terrible all around. The comedy, there was no comedy to speak of in this movie. It was trying so very hard to be funny, and it just failed on all accounts. The cinematography looked like shit. The video quality of this movie is about the same as MTV's TV show Undressed. If you can picture that show from the 90s, that gives you kind of an idea of what this movie looked like. It was okay for like a no-budget movie, but when you compare it to any real movie, it just fell short. The sound was decent though, but the soundtrack, again, not as good as it could have been. It was clear that they were using music from like local bands that there's a reason why they're not signed. I give 18-Year-Old Virgin a 2 out of 5, and the only reason I get that high of a score is because it did keep me interested, and that is always a plus when it comes to a no-budget film. Next up, I saw Three Ninjas, going back to the childhood movies again, but unlike the Neverending Story, this movie did not deliver at all. The action was not there. The fighting scenes were terrible, the acting was bad, the story had plot holes left and right, and I give Three Ninjas a 2 out of 5 as well. And finally, I saw a movie that surprised the hell out of me, an animated movie called For Terra. This movie is very similar to Avatar in a lot of ways, and in some ways it's even better than Avatar. I thought the world, the world that this movie took place in, was much more creative than the world in Avatar. And I thought there were parts of the story that were better in this movie than in Avatar's movie. Now, granted, this was a completely animated movie, and the animation in this does not come even close to Avatar. Clearly, nothing does. In fact, this was very cheap-looking animation. However, it had an all-star voice cast. Like, all-star voice cast. And while the animation wasn't all that great, it was maybe like Planet 51 animation, which again, not saying much. It's okay, but the world, despite not looking as amazing as it could have from some other animation studios, was still extremely unique and interesting. And the story again was better than Avatar's story. There were parts where it seemed about the same, parts where it didn't seem as good, but for the most part, it was a much better story than Avatar's story. And so for this, while it didn't have as good of visuals, it definitely had better story and better acting, in my opinion. I give For Terra a 4.5 out of 5, which I believe I only gave Avatar a 4 out of 5, if that tells you anything. If you haven't seen Battle of Terra, in fact, most of you probably haven't even heard of Battle for Terra, because it wasn't really advertised at all. You should definitely check it out. On Netflix, they have it streaming, so if you have Netflix, check it out live on the website, because you'll be glad you did. This movie trumps Avatar, and it's a fairly cheap animated movie. Check it out. That's my stack for this week. Hope to see you guys next week. And if you haven't already watched it, I do have a review up already for The Fighter, which I just watched tonight, starring Christian Bale and Mark Wahlberg. Check out that review as well. I will see you guys next week.